Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Forum at St. Bart's. My name is Peter Thompson, and I'm the Associate Rector for Formation and Liturgy here. And I am thrilled to welcome to the Forum today the filmmaker Julian Marshall, who is here to talk about his short film, We Are George Floyd, which he shot and directed in the protests following George Floyd's murder in late May of this year. Julian, it's so great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Peter, and I'm excited to talk to everybody.
Yeah, and full disclosure, Julian and I went to high school together, so it's especially great to welcome you to St. Bart's, albeit virtually. So we're going to give folks the chance to watch the film in just a moment, but I wondered before we watch the film together if you had any things you wanted to share about it.
Sure, yeah. So, the impetus for the film was, I'd seen George Floyd's murder, the video, maybe the day after it happened, and for a couple of days, I really just sat with it. It was really distressing. And then it hit a point when the protests started here in New York that I knew I had to do something to help people kind of channel that energy and outrage that was happening. And so this film is the product of that.
Excellent. Well, let's take a look at the film and then we'll come back afterwards and discuss it.
Thanks.
Well, I just want to begin by extending my condolences to the Floyd family. They exemplify spiritual nobility. That's very important. Long history, 400 years of black people having to come to terms with these kinds of vicious murders and assassinations and attacks. But I think what we're really experiencing here, though, brother, and I say this in all honesty and deep sadness, but I think we are witnessing America as a failed social experiment. And what I mean by that is that the history of black people for over 200 and some years in America has been looking at America's failure. Its capitalist economy could not generate and deliver in such a way that people could live lives of decency. The nation state, its criminal justice system, its legal system could not generate protection of rights and liberties. And now our culture, of course, is so market-driven, everybody for sale, everything for sale. It can't deliver the kind of nourishment for soul, for meaning, for purpose. And so when you get this perfect storm of all of these multiple failures at these different levels of the American empire, and Martin King already told us about that. When I saw those pictures there in Atlanta, you could see Martin right there in Atlanta saying, I told you about militarism, I told you about poverty, I told you about materialism, I told you about racism and all of its forms. And what we've seen in America is now these chickens coming home to roost. And in this instant, you have Brother George, where it is so clear it is a lynching at the highest level. Nobody can deny it. And I thank God that we have people in the streets. Can you imagine this kind of lynching taking place and people are indifferent? People don't care? People are callous? But you know what's sad about it though, brother? At the deepest level, it looks as if the system cannot reform itself.
I'm the son of a police officer. My cousin is a police officer. And my other cousin, East Point, police officer. And I got a lot of love and respect for police officers, down to the original 8 police officers in Atlanta that even after becoming police had to dress in a YMCA because white officers didn't want to get dressed with niggers. And here we are 80 years later. I watched a white officer assassinate a black man. And I know that tore your heart out. And I know it's crippling. And I have nothing positive to say in this moment, because I don't want to be here. I'm duty bound to be here to simply say that it is your duty not to burn your own house down for anger with an enemy. It is your duty to fortify your own house so that you may be a house of refuge in times of organization. I'm mad as hell. I woke up wanting to see the world burn down yesterday because I'm tired of seeing black men die. He casually put his knee on a human being's neck for 9 minutes as he died like a zebra in the clutch of a lion's jaw. So that's why children are burning to the ground. They don't know what else to do. So my question for us on the other side of this camera is, after it burns, will we be left with charred, or will we rise like a phoenix out of the ashes? It is the responsibility of us to make this better right now. We don't want to see one officer charged. We want to see 4 officers prosecuted and sentenced. We want to see the system that sets up for systemic racism burnt to the ground. But what I can tell you is that if you sit in your homes tonight, instead of burning your home to the ground, you will have time to properly plot, plan, strategize, and organize and mobilize in an effective way. And 2 of the most effective ways is first taking your butt to the computer and making sure you fill out your sentences so that people know who you are and where you are. The next thing is making sure you exercise your political bully power and going to local elections and beating up the politicians that you don't like. Now is the time to do that, but it is not time to burn down your own home. Now is the time to plot, plan, strategize, organize, and mobilize.
Julian, it's a really stunning and powerful work. I'm wondering if you can sort of take us back to the evening or morning when you decided to first walk onto the street. I know you live very close by, so this was really kind of happening on your doorstep. What made you want to go out into the street, and what was that experience like? I mean, you did such a great job of vividly depicting it for us, but is there anything that doesn't come through on the film about what the atmosphere on the streets?
Yeah, well, let me take a step back. So, I'd kind of mentioned it. I had to sit with what was happening for a few days, and after being locked inside for 3 months, I was pretty paranoid at the idea of going out and protesting, where normally, I go out, it's like after Donald Trump got elected, I think I went out for 5 days straight and protested. But, I remember, I think it was Friday night, maybe, one of those nights, it was just a completely sleepless night for me, dealing with this. And I woke up, I think it was Saturday morning, and I heard the words of Killer Mike and of Cornel West. It was Cornel West's CNN interview and Killer Mike's Atlanta press conference. And it just kind of hit me. It hit me both that I had a duty to do something, but also the way to structure it, that Cornel West would be presenting the problem and Killer Mike would be presenting the solution. And so, I went out that whole day and shot the daytime protests, which were, peaceful, which was really nice. And then went home in the evening to charge batteries and eat dinner. And I think around like 9 o'clock, I had a feeling that something was going to happen at night. I had no clue what or where. I walked out of my apartment with my camera. I think I turned left on 3rd Avenue, and then a ton of cop cars just ripped by me. And I just kind of chased them up to Union Square and immediately saw a cop car on fire, and started shooting. And very quickly I realized that it's a situation where you have to be completely aware of everything around you. It's in that moment, maybe like a minute or two after getting there, the gas tank for this cop car exploded, and I just happened to capture that one. It was a very, very dangerous situation, because whatever it was that the people had used to blow up the 3 cop cars that are in this film, it wasn't amateur. It wasn't just lighting something up. And at least one of those cop cars was in the middle of an intersection. So, someone had done that with someone in the car. And, so maybe I spent, it's hard to keep track of the time, but it was a couple of hours of shooting the riots. And this is a moment where this is like the first moment this broke out. So this is before there was any looting. What was happening was really symbolic, and it was something that I personally don't agree with. And ended up being one of the biggest messages of the film that I made is that we need to not burn our city down because we need this place in order to be politically active and solve the problem that we're fighting against. So maybe that's like a good overview for how this came about.
How did you think about keeping yourself safe out there? Or was that not one of your priorities?
Oh, it absolutely was. For one, I was wearing a respirator, which is it's not great when you're dealing with smoke, but, kept me safe from the virus. But then in terms of, being in the middle of the situations with the cop cars and, everything getting lit up, for a lot of that, I was, ducking behind cars and trying to find the right amount of shelter just in case. You don't know what's going to happen in a situation like that. Someone could be trying to draw out the cops to harm them, and you could just get caught in the middle of that. So, doing everything I could to be aware of my surroundings and aware of where law enforcement was, who were, very much reacting to this in real time. Yeah.
So you said you kind of felt a duty to be out there. What do you think you were trying to achieve in capturing this on film and sharing it with others?
So, after Donald Trump got elected, I made a protest film. And it was very much an emotional reaction to what was occurring. Because everyone was, at least here in New York, was in varying levels of shock. Some people maybe saw it coming, but didn't think it was going to happen. And for some people, it completely flipped their world upside down. But that film, I felt like it very much captured the energy of what was occurring in that moment. But at the same time, I don't think because I was living that moment in real time, didn't have time to reflect on what had just happened. I didn't think I really presented a solution to it. And this time it was very important to me to make sure that I was presenting a solution for how we can actually fix this problem. And kind of as I'd said, Killer Mike's words were a big part of me kind of, verbalizing that. For one, the idea that, for me, like I grew up as a constant victim of police brutality in DC, getting tackled by cops for skateboarding and this and that. But over the years, you have to, I challenged myself to try to find the truth in these situations, and you really can't have a black and a white. I tend to not like to live in extremes. That largely the system of law enforcement in this country is that is the real problem. It's a system that incentivizes bad behavior and brings out the worst in bad people. But if we want to remediate the situation, we do have to get good police officers on our side. It's going to be a lot harder to do that if we vilify everything within. And one other thing I should mention is I had just made a film back in February. It was a film for PricewaterhouseCoopers, and it was about police brutality and unconscious bias. And I spent a lot of time that day talking to the LAPD officers who were doing the lockups on my set. They helped me make my film more realistic. And, these were really good guys. And I called up one of the officers after George Floyd was murdered and asked him what he thought about it and what, how people in the police force, how good people in the police force felt about it. And they were just as distressed, if not more distressed than we were, because it makes their job 10 times harder. So that also factored into why I decided to go out, was while it won't sit well with a lot of people, to try to show this nuance, that we need the help of those people in order to reform the system.
Mm. The contrast between the words of Cornel West and Killer Mike are strong, and you kind of symbolize that contrast by having your nighttime footage with the words of Cornel West and the daytime footage with the words of Killer Mike. I'm curious. Cornel West says, the system can't reform itself, or something to that effect. And then Killer Mike's solutions, and your kind of ultimate solution when you say get out and vote there, is something that happens within the system. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that kind of contrast.
Yeah, it depends. So it depends on what you mean when you say the system cannot reform itself.
I forget the exact quote.
Oh no, that's what he says at the end of the segment. The unfortunate part about it is that the system cannot reform itself. So it's a question of, can the system reform itself without us intervening in a large way? And intervening can be voting. Intervening can be showing up in such large waves that the system has no choice but to bend to the will of the people. The problem, obviously, is that we don't live in a direct democracy, so it's a lot more complicated than that. I think that we need to start by doing the things that we aren't doing a good job of, which is voting. That disproportionately in the last election, young people didn't vote. And I'm not going to get into the multitudes of reasons for why that didn't occur, but that is where a lot of this starts. And the problem is, it's not only voting for president; it's voting at every level. It's voting for senators, and voting for the House, and ultimately, for me, the most important thing is the judiciary system. That if the Supreme Court falls out of balance, that will affect this country for decades and decades and decades. So we need to go out and first make sure that we show up to maintain control of those, or rather regain control of those systems. And if that doesn't work, then then you have to take much more extreme measures. But yeah.
So you knew you were going to use these two sets of words before you shot a second. I'm curious if what you saw on the street kind of confirmed the plan you had going into this, or whether it was different.
It did. It did. Knowing what you're going to say before you go out and shoot something is everything, whether that be thematically or plotting wise. I've got plenty of examples. So moments where police officers were marching with protesters, which is a powerful symbol. And in terms of the riots, seeing some moments where different storefronts were getting smashed, and this is before, like, that first night, there really wasn't any damage to small businesses. It was like major corporations and chains. There's a moment in the film where I think the window of like one of the Verizon stores got smashed, and you have this juxtaposition of on their screen, it's just saying more, 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 and you see the window smashed there. That was I saw that, and I was like, this is completely in line with what Cornel West is saying, and symbolic of the system failing us, and the system failing to be sensitive to our needs. So yeah.
Do you have a sense? Do you think your film ends with a sense of hope?
Yeah.
Is it hopeful?
Yeah. I mean, that was the goal, is to empower people to get up and do something. You have to give people hope in a moment like this. Otherwise, it just falls into nihilism.
Sure. So how do you look at your film now? You produced it kind of rapidly as events were going on. Now that we have the distance of a few weeks, the protests are not at the same level that they were 2 months ago, but they're still going on. How do you view your film now, and how do you view the situation as a whole?
Well, I think that one of the great things about it, looking at the analytics from it, is that, and this is very, very rare with internet attention spans, but I think like 90 or 95% of people who started the film finished it. And that is very, very rare, and it clearly struck a chord with people, and still people are still seeing it for the first time now, and it's hitting people just as hard as it did, back in June, which I'm really, that's all I could ever hope from something like that was made so immediately in that moment, is that it continues to be a part of the discussion that's happening. And that's great, because we have to continue this energy through November. And as we were talking about earlier, it's inspiring to me to see the energy continuing to move throughout the country. I think that that moment was really a tipping point. I think it was a big tipping point where we are going to see change as a result of it. It's hard to ignore at this point.
Well, I encourage those of you who are watching and have questions for Julian to send them in. You can use the live chat function on YouTube, the comments on Facebook, or you can email me at pthompson@stbarts.org. Julian, the scenes of violence from in the nighttime section, the first section of the film, I presume that you haven't seen that kind of level of violence on any of the projects you've worked on before. And I'm curious, did that change your notion of what was going on in the protest? Did that change your ideas about police brutality, the role of the police? What did those scenes of violence do for you?
Yeah, I've never seen anything like it here in New York, in person, in New York City. Nor did I ever expect that it would happen, here in my neighborhood in Manhattan. One of the tricky things was, in living in that moment, for the week plus that it occurred, it gave me, I don't know, maybe a month of PTSD, of like mild PTSD, mild compared to what a lot of other people experience. But having constant helicopters in the air for 2 weeks without any time in between, constant sirens, constant violence, yeah, I mean, for me, it impacted me on a very deep and personal level, to the point where, while editing this project, I was in tears, which has maybe only happened once or twice on other projects of mine, where it was so personal and so reactionary. And that was kind of the moment when I knew this was going to strike a chord with people. Was that personally it was overwhelming. But in terms of the violence, and the policing side of it, it's a tricky situation where there was a ton of needless police brutality. I had moments where I was shooting some of the lineups and had cops with riot shields shoving me, and I'm like, whoa, hey, I'm holding a camera. What's going on, guys? Like, I'm clearly not doing anything. And there's kind of nothing there. People who, you can tell there were a few people who just came out wanting to push people around. There were plenty of peaceful protesters during the riots, but then there were also protesters who were trying to start shit. There was a moment where things were actually at a reasonable standoff, and a protester threw a rock at a cop, and it's like, all right, what do you think is going to happen? So yeah, it was a tricky situation, where there wasn't a lot of unity on both sides of that conflict. Yeah.
I'm curious about the role you think capitalism plays in all of this, because Cornel West kind of goes after capitalism. And as you mentioned, you have the kind of scene where the Verizon store has been shattered. And as he's talking about that, and that seems to be symbolic there. People have diagnosed what happened with George Floyd in a lot of different ways, and the lens has been wider or smaller depending on your perspective. Whether it's about police reform or abolishing the police, whether it's about a whole systemic racism, whether it's about capitalism's role in all of that. I'm curious. I know you work in the world of capitalism as well. You work on commercials. What do you see as the role of capitalism in all this? Because I think generationally, there's been a huge difference in how wide people have seen the problem.
Yeah. Well, let's start with talking about capitalism broadly. So, and again, there are views that I hold that some people may object to, but I think capitalism is probably the strongest incentive structure that has ever existed in human history to create growth, to build, to pull people out of poverty. However, I think the biggest problem is that I think we no longer live in a capitalist society. I think it's gotten so bastardized that what we really live in is a corporatist society, where we very literally have corporations writing our laws to benefit corporations and buying our politicians. And what that's created is you basically extremely enrich people who are exposed to the stock market, and especially corporate executives, and then people who aren't get completely left behind. So you look at wage growth from 1980 to the present. Most Americans haven't seen any wage growth for 40 years. And in that time, productivity has gone through the roof. And I think we are feeling the pain of that right now, where I think it's attributed to two things, in my opinion. I think it's attributed to the invention of the computer, and I think it's attributed to massive deregulation under Ronald Reagan, et cetera. But I think it's mostly the computer. And Donald Trump will blame immigrants because that's what people want to hear and what they can see in front of them. But the reality of it is that you have software engineers who have 100 times the productivity of a factory worker, and we're seeing the acceleration of people losing their jobs to automation and AI, and we're at the beginning of that acceleration curve. So I think largely we have a system that has to be reformed to prioritize the well-being of most Americans, or we're going to see more of these breaking points. And to me, where that starts is campaign finance. Imagine if we had publicly financed elections. The idea that you could signal your support for a given candidate, and that would unlock public funds, maybe ranked choice voting on top of that. I think that would begin to change a lot of what's causing this pain. To get dark money and corporate money out of elections, so that politicians are actually acting for their constituents and incentivized to act for their constituents. That's what would solve a lot of these problems. But so then talking to the defund the police movement, I actually think that defund the police is an unfortunate slogan, because it immediately gave Donald Trump power to go out to his base and say, they want to make your neighborhoods unsafe. They want to get out of they want to get rid of the police and hurt the safety and security of your family. What it really should be, in my opinion, is demilitarize the police. Because talking about incentive structures, we've built this world where police have gained access to a lot of weapons that typically only military has access to. And what the result of that is when you have someone is scared and looks into their neighbor's house and sees someone in there they don't recognize, they call the cops. It turns out it's that person's house, and the cops come in shooting and someone gets shot. What we need to do is to largely demilitarize the police and build a new police force that can go and respond to nonviolent situations. And I think these things are all interconnected in terms of how the incentive structures of this country work.
Yeah, and certainly part of what made the moment of George Floyd's murder so big, in addition to this incredibly graphic video content, was the fact that so many people were out of work and the economy wasn't in a good state. So that speaks to some of the intersectionality here.
Absolutely, and like right now, we're going to see more of that pain with the end to the extra unemployment insurance, the pandemic unemployment assistance. That is in a way the Republicans going to war with the American people. Thinking that people are getting lazy, accepting this money when there are no jobs to go out and get right now. So it's a continuation of this backwards thinking that's gotten us here.
So again, I encourage those of you who are watching who have questions for Julian to send them in via the live chat function on YouTube, the comments on Facebook, or via email pthompson@stbarts.org, pthompson@stbarts.org. We have a question about what's happening right now in Portland and the kind of similarities and differences you see from what you witnessed firsthand here in New York.
Oh yeah, Portland is a very scary situation, and one that is kind of complex to unpack. That we have unmarked federal agents going in, and let me take a step back. So it's pretty unbelievable to me that the people who fight for states' rights and pro 2A and want smaller government can stand by and watch what's happening in Portland right now. To me, there's pretty strong cognitive dissonance there. And it's actually been really empowering to see. And the last day, I think a lot of veterans have been going to try to protect the protesters in Portland, because we're seeing in absolute destruction of the Constitution and our right to protest peacefully. And Donald Trump is taking a page out of the dictator's playbook in putting federal agents in camo, in military uniform, which is already something that's scary that we don't see a lot of here. Making them unmarked so that there's no accountability for what's happening. And he's also doing it to cause chaos and shift the narrative and try to continually move the narrative around faster than people can really hold on to it. He's trying to create a situation where people are distressed and can't focus on his failure, his failure to protect us from the pandemic. So I think that there's a lot at play right there. And when you put people in a situation where they have to deal with the immediacy of it, they can't, it's much harder to see the big picture. So yeah, that's a scary situation that, if that becomes normalized, if the idea of, if he is able to start sending more of these federal troops into federal officers into different blue states, and that becomes normal in some way, that's going to completely change this country. Yeah.
We have another question about the extent to which you may be concerned that your footage would be taken out of context, maybe by an opposing side. Do you think at all when you're shooting a film about how your footage could be manipulated or used by others?
So taken out of context, as in someone lifting my footage and recontextualizing it?
I guess so, yeah.
Well, luckily the film's copyrighted, so
Sure.
It's protected by the law in that situation. I think that's an issue in general with the art of filmmaking and the ease of reproducing digital filmmaking, is that the power of propaganda. With the power of propaganda, you can easily take an image and recontextualize it to tell whatever story you want. It's largely the people that have tried to. There have been people who've taken my footage and tried to use it for different purposes, and none of them have been for a purpose that I ideologically disagree with. Luckily, so I'm going to fight to make sure that what I've created doesn't get used for a purpose that I disagree with. But you can't stop someone from just downloading it and doing whatever they want with it. But that is largely a problem, that we are in the middle of propaganda wars, and propaganda wars that are exacerbated by social media, by echo chambers and confirmation bias, and so it's a tricky situation.
I guess that takes us to our next question. Someone asks, when are you running for office? But I guess I'll broaden that question to sort of ask about the connection between politics and filmmaking. We've talked, about several political issues already, and film has this power to impact politics, to affect political change, and I'm wondering to what extent you've thought about that, and how that does or doesn't influence your filmmaking.
Well, it's tricky. More often than not, film is used as propaganda in the political system, left and right. And there's a long history of that. You go back to Leni Riefenstahl making propaganda films for the Nazis. For me, I personally will not make propaganda for anyone. Anytime I'm approached to do anything political, it has to be something that just stems from revealing the truth. And of course, there's always going to be some inherent degree of bias, but when you get into the realm of saying things that are half truths, or completely untrue, that's when it's wildly unethical. But it's something that we have to deal with right now. We have to be fact checking. We have to hold people accountable for putting things out that aren't true right now, because otherwise you end up in a situation like Soviet Russia or like Russia today, where no one knows what's true. And when you devalue the truth as a construct, that there's no return after that point. And it's what we're on the brink of with Donald Trump. It's he's very shrewdly using the Putin playbook right now.
I wonder if you can talk about the role of the media in the events of the past few months. As a filmmaker who's not principally a journalist, I don't think you identify as a journalist. How do you think journalists are doing, given your knowledge of film and the way media can be used?
So it's hard to say broadly. It's hard to generalize about how journalists are doing right now, because there are some people who are doing a great job to pick apart what's happening right now and be fair, and try to get to the truth. But we do have a broader problem with the media in this country, and one that existed before Donald Trump came out and started yelling fake news and made it like he has his own agenda there. But in going back to what I was saying about incentive structures, a lot of the mainstream media, they're corporations. with stock prices, and we've reached this point where they're incentivized to do whatever will make their stock price go up largely. And in some cases, like you take Fox News, that is telling people what they want to hear to keep them on the platform. The same thing, it's the same with social media, Facebook. Uh, Unfortunately, we are in this situation where they aren't necessarily always incentivized to paint the full picture in the way that they were, when we were growing up and before, because of the way that, uh, you know, capitalism has changed things as it's moved into what I call this like corporatist environment. But there are so many amazing journalists out there that are putting themselves in harm's way every single day to fight what's happening. And those people are absolute heroes to continue every single day pushing against a president that wants to silence them and wants to kill freedom of speech.
So we have a question here about the difference between innocent, quote unquote, protesters and protesters who are trying to create chaos. Is that something that you saw when you were on the streets? And I'm also sort of thinking about, you chose to include kind of Killer Mike's message to not burn your own house down. But that kind of messaging was somewhat controversial because a lot of people felt, riots are the, in the language of Martin Luther King Jr., riots are the language of the unheard. Mm-hmm. And to criticize people that otherwise don't have a voice may not be fair if their only way of being heard is to engage in some kind of violence or looting.
Well, that's what the riots was a cry out. There's a lot of people saying, you're not listening, and this is the only way I can get your attention. So, it's something where while I disagree with the idea of rioting, it happened, and it is indicative of an underlying problem that we have to solve so it doesn't happen again. I do think there's going to be more of it because there are a lot of people in general in this country who aren't being heard.
Yeah. Did you get a sense that there were kind of agitator protesters out there? Was that a dynamic that you observed? Or is that kind of a false distinction between protesters who are innocent and not?
Well, the problem is it's hard to say what anyone's motivation was because of the anonymity of the protest, because everyone's
Sure.
wearing masks. Because there were reports of neo-Nazis going out into these protests to incite violence between protesters and cops. So I saw people trying to incite violence, but I've got no clue who they are or what their motivation was. So it's not something that I can generalize about in any way.
Sure. So as we come towards a close, I'm wondering how did the widespread viewing of this film surprise you? Did you sort of know that a lot of people were going to watch this when you posted this? And how does the fact that this film went viral? I know you were covered by NPR, BET, probably several other outlets. How does that impact your work going forward?
I knew it was going to get shared because of the immediacy of what was happening, but I did not think it would get shared at that scale. It's humbling is what it is, to be able to make a message that people identify with so strongly that they feel a need to share it. And that's all the goal was for this. The result of it, I'm very fortunate for the result of it. I very purely did this, for myself to be able to cope with what was going on and to help others cope. The result of it is that I've had a lot of people reach out to me to tell more stories after this, which the timing of us being in the middle of a pandemic is unfortunate, because I can't, work at the scale that I typically do. But that's what's great out of it is that the ability to continue telling stories has come out of this.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this morning, Julian.
Thank you
for your really important work. We really appreciate you sharing both with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for watching. We'll see you for worship at 11 a.m.